Hello everyone, welcome back. You're watching Empyrion Galactic Survival episode 125. I'm Enigmaeus and today we're continuing with the Broadsword build. It's a small vessel that's a little bit larger than your average small vessel. It's also almost complete in terms of closing in the hull. And because of that, I wanted to get some doors in place because it was getting a little bit tricky to get in and out of the ship with all of the holes plugged. It's just the way it works sometimes, I guess. I didn't want to do anything too crazy with the doors. I wanted to have them relatively nondescript in terms of how they look from the outside of the ship, but at the same time I wanted them to be easily accessible, which suggested that we built sort of a little ridge that you can jump up onto and then open the door and then step through, as opposed to not having that ridge and having to open the door from the ground and then jump up through the hole that you just opened. So nothing particularly difficult about that. And then I decided to show you just a part of this process that I like to call putting a second layer of blocks on the floor. It's pretty straightforward. I did this because, one, it was an easy way to finish that bottom layer, I guess you could say, that bottom profile. The easiest way to finish it off would just flatten the whole thing out, and then I didn't have to worry about how it would merge with the floor, between the wall and the floor. So we got that done, and it's also a little extra protection if you're taking fire from the ground, as might be the case with the point of interest that you were attacking. You got a little bit of extra protection there to avoid catastrophes. Now we're working on the back of the ship again, and I've mentioned a number of times that this was one area of the ship that I wanted to make sure that I spent enough time on to build in some details so that it would be a little bit more interesting than just the uniform profile that we had originally built. We came up with this nice S kind of profile, or reverse S, depending on how you want to look at it. And then when we expanded it to fill the entire back of the ship, what we ended up with was this wide S-shaped profile that was kind of dull, and I wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to fill that out a little bit. So what we're doing here as part of that is we're spending a little bit of time on the transition here. We've got this structure that most of the jet engines are attached to, and spending a little bit of time on the way that this joins towards the back end of the ship helps to keep things from looking a little bit too dull or a little bit too disjointed. And then we've got this profile up here on the very top of the ship that's kind of this gentle sloping curve kind of thing. And it's right in that spot where your eyes hit every time you're changing your view from what's going on in front of your ship as opposed to the ship itself when you're flying around with a chase camera, which is what I tend to be doing most of the time when I'm flying around. So it was very important to me that I get this transition done in a way that I was going to be happy with, so that I wasn't always resting my eyes on this part of the ship that I wasn't happy with. It's fairly straightforward reasoning that I use a lot when I'm building things. If I look at it, does it make me feel bad? If the answer is yes, I'd change it. And that's the extent of what we're doing here. And we're not talking about a massive overhaul. You just saw, we're talking about a few blocks and putting them together in a way. It's not seamless, but it's much, much better than it was. And now we've got those two sort of raised panels on the back that we just put in inside of the transition areas that for the structures that are holding the jets. In the next episode, you'll see more going on in the back, but for now, one thing that I wanted to put on were some shrouds around these engines. And you see, I kind of did this a little bit backwards. I built the first one, and then I decided to show you the footage of me building the second one using the first as a reference. And I did this because it's a little bit smoother, the building process. The first one was a lot of humming and hawing and making a bunch of different changes on the fly, which is sometimes a little bit not so pleasant to watch because it's difficult to anticipate when the next change is going to happen. So you can see here, there's really not a whole lot going on here that's especially complicated. It's just a couple of different profiles, a fairly tight fitting profile that goes around the engines, and then on the very front there's a couple of blocks that's a little bit larger, it's a little bit looser, and it just kind of gives the impression that things are a little bit larger than they are. In terms of actual practical defense, this isn't as good as a complete shroud, obviously, around the engines. I'm not really too worried about that. The engines themselves have something like 850 health, So given that the AI in the game doesn't aim specifically for the engines, if the engines are getting hit, it's sort of the projectiles were heading towards your core or your weapons and you slipped out of the way and hit the engines instead. That's sort of where they're going to be taking most of their damage from. So I can live without having a complete protective solution around the engines, because I know that they're not going to be taking a lot of hits. They're not going to be targeted in a PvE sense specifically. And as importantly, if people are getting the blueprint for the ship, and they want more protection for a PvP kind of environment, or just their own personal preference in the PvE side of things, it'd be very, very easy to build off of the shroud so that they can add that extra protection without having to do any kind of major overhaul or anything like that. So it's a win-win sort of scenario where I get to do what I want to do, knowing that it's not the ideal practical solution, but without shortchanging people who get the blueprint and would like to see more. So that's kind of where it sits with that. Very simple shroud design. Turned out aesthetically to be something that I was quite happy with, and I didn't have to worry about. You know, there's always the opportunity later on, if I do get an idea, to improve or modify and come up with something better. But if I never get around to that point, I'm not going to be looking at it saying, what a horrible thing have I done to my ship. Everything else on this ship I like, except for that one crappy part. So it's pretty straightforward the way it's coming together. Now, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on really repetitive details and iteration going around the ship over and over and over again. In fact, you may have noticed already, if you have those kinds of sharp eyes, that I've made a number of iterations to the main hull already and smoothed it off quite a bit relative to what we had in the original enclosure, especially the front and middle sections of the hull. And it'll probably be easier to see those changes in the thumbnails actually when we're not moving around so much, and of course the finished blueprint when you get it and you can actually take a look at the ship in your world. So the next episode we're going to be working a little bit more on the back of the ship, putting some more details there and getting that closer to a state of completion that I'm happy with. And we're also going to be working on adding thrusters that we still need. We don't have lift thrusters yet, we don't have descent thrusters, and we don't have lateral thrusters on the ship yet. So we're going to be working towards resolving that and bringing ourselves closer to a finished ship. So I would say 2, maybe 3 more episodes, and then following that we'll have the blueprint available for you guys. You can take a look at the ship in your worlds and goof around with it and have some fun. So if you want to be notified about the next and future episodes, the easiest way to do that is to subscribe to my channel or follow me on social media. Links for social media are always in the information section below the video. Feel free to leave your comments and feedback. Thanks for watching, guys, and take care.